with that, we're going to keep moving along here and would like to introduce our first speakers. They are two of the true Sierra Nevada champions whose organizations under their leadership do fantastic work on a variety of fronts on behalf of the Sierra Nevada region. They both, I know, were actively involved in creating the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, so without those efforts, we would not be here today. So I really appreciate you both being here. First, we have Steve Frisch, who is the president of the Sierra Business Council. And I started to say Izzy Martin, but she's really like Cher. It's like Izzy. If you say Izzy, you don't really need to say anything more, but for formalities, Elizabeth Izzy Martin, the president and CEO of the Sierra Fund. So welcome. We look forward to you sharing some insights on what's going on in the Sierra Nevada today. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jim. And thank you to the board and the esteemed panel today for the opportunity to speak. My name is Steve Frisch. I'm the president of the Sierra Business Council. We're a regional business network that works on business innovation, energy, and climate adaptation and mitigation in the Sierra Nevada region. So my role today is to help introduce this forum with some observations about the state of the Sierra region leading into a discussion of Sierra forests and watersheds. And I wish I could tell you that things are great, but in many ways, as we heard from much of the panel, it's not. In the 23 years that the Sierra Business Council has been tracking the overall health of the Sierra Nevada, I can honestly say that I'm not sure I've been more concerned about the future of our region than I am today. And for many of you who travel to the Sierra Nevada, you see a bucolic landscape covered in trees and transected by rushing rivers. And if your vision of the Sierra is essentially your trip from Los Angeles to Mammoth Lakes and Bishop, or from the San Francisco Bay Area to Lake Tahoe and Hope Valley and other places, you see a portion of the Sierra Nevada that is actually quite affluent. As a matter of fact, Placer County, El Dorado County are amongst the wealthiest counties in our state. But if you get off the beaten path and you find the real Sierra Nevada and the back roads between the jewels and in the other regions of the Sierra, you see a very different story. And in preparation for today, I crunched data on 28 Northern California counties, including the 22 counties that include some portion of the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. So there are also some Cascade counties included in here and a couple of North Coast counties who we consider our friends and neighbors. So in 75% of the Northern California counties, the average household income is less than 80% of the state average. Unemployment is generally about 2% higher in those counties than the rest of the state of California, but worse, underemployment, that is, people marginally attached to the labor force because of a lack of full-time work or who have stopped seeking work, is 50% higher than the rest of the state. 1 in 4 workers in that region between the ages of 25 and 54 are idle. The rent burden in more than half of these counties, measured as a percentage of annual household income spent on housing, is equal or greater than it is in San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Jose, and San Diego. In 50% of the Northern California counties, there are more opioid prescriptions than there are people. I'll let that sink in for just a second. The portion of housing defined as substandard in this region is 50% higher than the state average. 40% of the income in the northern counties is transfer payments, that is Social Security income, Social Security disability income, and retirement pensions. That's compared to a statewide average of about 22%. The average age in these counties is 15% older than the rest of the state. Educational attainment is 65% of the state average. In most of these counties, more children qualify for federally subsidized school lunches than the state average, and 8 of the counties are in the top 20 in the state. The energy burden, which is measured as the percent of income spent on energy, is almost 2 times higher than the statewide average. Vehicle miles traveled in this region is 50% higher, meaning transportation costs are higher with no alternatives for public transportation. 6 of the 10 counties in California with the worst overall health rankings are in this region. Underlying all of these issues in the Sierra Nevada, the incidence and severity of wildfire is growing, putting communities at risk and threatening carbon stocks in the state's water supply. Keying off something that Tribal Chairman Mortimer said, the land is suffering, and when the land suffers, the people suffer. In the Sierra Nevada and much of the North State, there's a direct link between the health of our landscape and the socioeconomic health of our communities and its people. And somehow, we just don't see rural poverty if the backdrop is a mountain. None of these communities qualify as top 25% disadvantaged communities under the state's Cal EnviroScreen 3.0 tool, meaning that they can't compete for more than 50% in some programs and 100% in some of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund designated programs to address natural resource, housing, transportation, air quality issues related to the impact of climate change. I would argue that these socioeconomic conditions are shared by millions of Californians, not just from parts of the Sierra Nevada, but on the Modoc Plateau, the Cascade, the North Coast, the Central Valley, the Inland Empire, the Coachella Valley, and the Imperial Valley. This is the 2 Californias that we talk about. The result is that a growing number of communities across the rural landscape are isolated from the economic and social progress that many urban areas have experienced across the state. This distancing between urban and rural prosperity is dangerous for all Californians. Without proactive planning for rural regions and their long-term resilience, severe risks are faced not only by rural communities but to the urban areas by undermining the stability of the ecosystem services that they rely on that Randy referred to for clean air, for water, for food, for forest products, for open space, for recreation, for all of these attributes. Maintaining the quality of these environmental services is essential for sustaining a growing population in California. There are solutions to these problems. We need a real dialogue across this state and in rural regions about developing strategies to reverse rural poverty and the degradation of the conditions in our landscapes. These solutions would include not just natural resource restoration, but also the economic development associated with it that will lift communities out of poverty in places like the forests and the watersheds of the Sierra Nevada. When the Sierra Nevada Conservancy was created 12 years ago, the idea was that the agency could act as a catalyst for the type of change we need in our region, and we think that they have done a remarkable job in doing that. But it's not enough, and it's not enough yet, and as you see from the video and from the comments on this dais, the risk is increasing as time goes on. It's time that California confronted this dirty secret and created a new approach to rural revitalization. We need leaders to lead, and that means not just all of you up on the dais, but everyone in this room and our political and state leadership to lead. We need to engage our communities in developing and implementing the solutions. The communities are your partners, and they want to be your partners in leading in this revitalization. And it pains me to say that these issues are not getting the attention they deserve in California. I'm happy to see that later today there's a panel specifically focused on the link between urban and rural California and the role each plays in ensuring the prosperity of the state. As someone referred to, I think it was Mr. Moore, this really is a system, from watershed and forest restoration to infrastructure and infrastructure improvement, to the health of the Central Valley and groundwater recharge, to California's urban areas and the water improvements that can be made there. This is a system, and it needs to be looked at as a whole system across that transect. I'm really also happy to see that this dialogue about the urban-rural connection is taking off in California. It's a very heartening thing to see. But really, at the end of the day, I think the most important thing for us to remember for the rest of California is that if we lose Sierran and Cascade forests in this state, all the work we do on climate change will be reversed. There's 850 million metric tons of carbon stored in California's forests, according to the draft AB 32 scoping plan. And that forest is at risk to change from climate. Climate data today is showing that the change is going to be dramatic. It's happening much faster than we thought it was going to happen, and that it will affect carbon benefit, it will affect water yield, it will affect the regulation of our climate, it will affect our access to clean water, and it will affect the health of our communities. When the land suffers, the people suffer, and we have a moral responsibility to tend to both. So for more information about the specific state of Sierra watersheds, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Izzy Martin, or Izzy.
Now I'm going to give all the real information. Just teasing. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak this morning about these vital issues. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview, provide a context, and then I want to talk about a couple of policy issues, and then end with some lessons that I think we need to. We are in, oh, you couldn't hear me, huh? And I'm going to time myself. So the Sierra Fund was established 15 years ago. We celebrated our 15th birthday last night. Thanks to you that came and celebrated with us. And over the course of that time, we've been improving our understanding of what's been happening in the Sierra and establishing our work around a mission statement of increasing and organizing public and private investment in restoring the communities and resources of the Sierra. But last night, we actually announced a new mission statement. I bet you just have a tingle all over your body to hear what I'm going to say next. Yes, we released our new platform for action, a strategic plan outlining our new mission, our actions towards restoring ecosystem and community resiliency in the Sierra. Ecosystem and community resiliency. What do we have to recover from? What is resiliency? We describe those sorts of things. We also describe the last 5 years in the Sierra in our 5-year annual report. Please go to our website for copies of these. We're going to be exploring these themes at our upcoming conference. I'd love to have everybody. I'm going to leaflet you all when I'm done speaking with invitations to our conference. What are we trying to recover from? We're trying to recover from the assault that began about 200 years ago in the state of California, first by explorers and then by miners, followed by timber fellers, new forestry practices. Anything you could shoot was shot, anything you could cut down was cut, anything you could mine was mined. That built our economy, it built our state. It killed the people that were here by and large, although they have survived, and I'm very thankful and grateful to have several indigenous native tribal leaders in the room with us today. When the mining began, I don't think people thought about the long-term implications of cutting down all of the trees, or at least most of the trees in the Sierra, and damming and channeling all of the water, or at least most of the water, digging thousands of miles of ditches to convey these down to mines. So much material was blown apart by the hydraulic monitors up in our region that the Yuba River just flooded all over the place. That actually made the downstream neighbors come up and sue to stop hydraulic mining. At least people thought they'd stopped it, but actually they didn't. A few years after hydraulic mining was supposedly stopped, there was a new act passed which said you could build debris control dams to hold the material on your property and continue hydraulically mining, which they did, leaving an unknown number of legacy old debris control dams all over the forests with the Forest Service. Sierra Fund has been working with them to help identify these features. After clear-cutting the forests, obviously, what did we do next? Well, we suppressed fire for the next 100 years. So we've created this entirely artificial environment where we live, where the rivers run through mountains in tunnels. The forests are filled with things called Himalayan blackberry and Scotch broom, and those aren't from here. We have an entirely devastated landscape, which is kind of depressing. The good news about this, however, is that we have begun to, in the Sierra, create solutions. We've begun to understand what happened It's not a pristine forest out there that somehow we just need to take our hands off and it will self-manage. I've actually had an environmental leader tell me that forests are self-managing. They've never been self-managing. 1,000 years ago, the people that lived here managed those forests. They burned them. This is a very well-cultivated environment we're living in that we've managed to bring to its knees in a short 200 years after thousands of years of fish jumping out of the river, food falling off the trees. It was a beautiful, difficult place to live, but a beautiful place. We've really changed it. By understanding what happened, we can then fix it. You can't have this pie in the sky, this is some primitive forest and we just need to go do voodoo in it. There is a real serious need to manage what's happened and to target, to not throw up our hands and say it's impossible, but to actually look with clear eyes about what happened, and that's what the Sierra Fund's been trying to do. We started with mining. People think we work on mining. No, we're trying to restore the Sierra's ecosystem and community. What is resiliency? It's the ability of a system to recover from assaults. The system had adapted to a fire regime. Fire would come through, it would repair. The sediment regime, the water regime, those were all very well regulated systems when we got here. We're going to have to try to restore resiliency in all of those regimes. So we started with the mines. We've moved out to the mining features like the hydraulic, the old debris control dams. We're beginning to look at those. We have a new project we're starting out in a meadow where we're working with what happened to the meadows during this period of time. That didn't, Darth Vader did not come down and flatten all of our meadows. There's a real issue about helping our forests restore. There's a very important issue about helping the people that built this beautiful landscape help us restore that by working with tribal leadership and understanding the incredible role that they play and something that they play in the Sierra Fund. We work with them quite often. Okay, policy opportunities. The Sierra Fund gets right down into detail of how to fix things in about 5 minutes. You've heard everything I like to say about the general situation. When we build economic resiliency and environmental resiliency, we can solve these problems, and that's what we're interested in. Sierra Fund has led a project with partners over at the Nevada Irrigation District to restore capacity to their reservoir, treat the sediment they've removed, to remove the mercury. Mercury was widely used in mining in the 19th century. It's contaminating the entire watershed. It's not there on its own. It was brought there by us. It needs to be removed, in our view. So the Nevada Irrigation District, and thank you, Governor Brown, put up a request in his budget to deploy this brilliant project that Nevada Irrigation District has designed to restore capacity to their reservoir, remove the mercury, restore resiliency to that water system. There's also funding in the budget to help the state parks with their various abandoned mine projects. They've got 3 state parks with abandoned mines in them, and it brings new resources to those 3 sites. There is a huge opportunity to begin collaborative relationships with people around our landscape, and this is, I think, the context. So anyway, there's BCPs, there's a variety of legislation, there's people watching how we're going to invest that greenhouse money. And there's lots of people looking at where we live on a map and thinking to themselves that we need to acquire a lot more property up there, and I don't discourage that kind of thinking, but I do think we have to start thinking about land ownership patterns. When I was young, I worked in the organic farming industry and also in with the farm workers. And farming learned a lesson about the difference between a town surrounded by lots and lots of little healthy farms versus towns surrounded by a couple of huge farms. The little towns with lots of farms had higher voter registration, higher education, more hospital beds. Everything about that town was healthier. Towns surrounded by a couple of large landowners, poverty-stricken. What does that mean for where we are? What does that mean for the Sierra? We have a very large absentee landowner that we love you, Forest Service, but they are by any definition an absentee large landowner. Are we going to start having all of the rest of the land that's acquired by people that live in San Francisco or live in New Jersey and are getting conservation easements to leave the forest alone because it's self-managing? What does that mean for the rebuilding the resiliency of our economy? What does that mean about environmental justice, that people that live around the land should have something to say about what's happening up there? So I really think that this speaks to this issue that I think our country is thinking about right now, the difference between urban and rural. I think most of the people in this room, there's probably a higher percentage of rural people in this room than almost any place else in the state of California right now. Because there's very few of us. What are the big differences between urban and rural? Obviously, density. Seems axiomatic. But there are more differences than that. And understanding those and understanding that, it actually takes real skill to cut a tree down. Those folks aren't the evil barons. On the other hand, most of the jobs lost in the forest were lost because of technology. They were lost because of chainsaws. You know how long it used to take a couple of guys to take down a big tree? And how long it takes people to do it now? There's these enormous shifts happening out in rural, and rural has always basically been viewed as a colony, a resources colony. Extract the water, extract the gravel, extract the food, keep the roads working that extract those things for us. But I think that we have to have a different, more respectful relationship on both sides. Us rural people do seem to have our views about urbans as well, and it needs to be seen as a rich cultural difference instead of one's better than the other. I want to say one last thing on this. I just discovered this. David Rockefeller, whose family had a little trouble with the coal miners and the other folks in rural, 100 years after the terrible massacre at Ludlow of the striking miners and their families, Mr. Rockefeller went to the town and offered a couple of different observations about that moment, and I just want to read a couple of them. The first one he says is, absentee owners must still be held responsible for what they do not know firsthand. Absentee landowners are responsible for what they do not know firsthand. A diverse labor force requires special handling. Compassion is the key to conflict resolution, a Rockefeller. And a couple of his lessons for our time. Balance is the key to managing economic development and environmental protection. And finally, our grandchildren will thank us for being climate believers. We have to find a way to solve the climate problem, the water quality problem, the meadow problem, the forest problem, not as at each little random act of conservation, but instead as a full, healthy environmental restoration, community restoration agenda. We can't just do one. The meadows rely on the forest. They were all wrecked by what happened during the mining era, and they all need to be restored. And of course, the Sierra Fund is the biggest fan of the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. Okay, we're both big fans. And I'm very, very grateful that you are helping our area, our region, to take this huge piece on and break it down bit by bit and solve it that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve and Izzy. We really appreciate your being here, and we knew you were going to be inspiring, if a bit depressing, but it's appropriate, so thank you.
We can fix it. That is the solution.